Welcome to an introduction to process mapping. Today we're going to be taking a look at the basics for those with little or no experience. We'll be taking a look at what is a process map, why do we use this tool, as well as the different levels of process mapping. A process itself is a series of steps that, when completed, will create some sort of output. These steps are also referred to sometimes as activities or tasks. The reason why we want to be able to create a process map to show those steps is really from a collaboration and communication perspective. This tool ends up being very useful for us when we're wanting to introduce a change to our organization or when we want to improve an existing process. It's extremely useful for us to sit down with our stakeholders to show them a visual of what our process looks like and how it's operating. There are 3 levels of process mapping that can really be broken down into the what, the who, and the how. Our level 1 is a very high level description, often 3 to 7 steps that's describing what is happening. Our level 2 takes a look at those interactions, so it starts to define not only what is happening, but also who is responsible. Our level 3 is a procedural description. Not only does it talk to our what, our who, but also now we start getting into our how. Very often, these level 3 detailed maps are actually not created using visual aids, but rather they are procedures or training materials that are provided. Although there are some situations where you are going to want to document the procedural how in a process map. Let's walk through a level 1 process map and get an idea of what this looks like. So we're going to start by defining what is happening. You can see that we've kept this very short, very high level, and with a total of 5 shapes, where 3 of them are actually those tasks or activities, and then we have our start and end point. Looking at the start of our process, we can see that it's labeled as pay for a chocolate bar. We can also see that our starting point is that green circle where the cashier requests payment, and that's what's going to kick off the start of our process. The second step of our process is decide payment method, followed by processing payment, and then deciding the receipt method. Finally, our end event is going to be that red circle that says payment complete. Again, this is a very high level process map. As we start to look at our level 2, which is from that interaction, so not only what is happening, but also by who. So now what we can see is that we also have these 2 different lanes, which are referred to as a swim lane. We'll cover that off in more detail in another session. We can see that our payment for chocolate bar now has 2 parties that are interacting, our cashier and our customer. And without getting into much more detail, at a high level, we can see that request payment is still our start event, followed by now our determine payment method, which is underneath the customer's swim lane. Our level 3, as shared earlier, is our procedural, and it's mostly reserved for those learning and training materials, when you're wanting to learn about a process and you want to see that detail. There are other situations where you would want to see those details as well, like configuring a transporter processing system, or in robotics processing automation, where you're going to start having machines actually perform the function that human beings would do. In terms of considerations, I recommend not to overthink it and just get started. Make sure to have a start and finish point before you start your process map. But as you start to work through your process map, you're most likely to have multiple iterations and changes to it, so it will develop over time. Also, when you're mapping your current state, do not map the ideal one, always map what the real one is. What that's speaking to, when you're working with stakeholders and you're trying to map out how the process is operating, it isn't uncommon to have stakeholders share how the process should be operating or that ideal state one. Your obligation is to map out what the true current state is, even if it disagrees with what your stakeholders may be communicating. And try not to map procedural level descriptions. And what I mean by that, take into consideration the level of details that your audience needs. That procedural level descriptions very often gets into the details of the how, so unless if your audience is looking for that, I'd recommend that you do not get into those details. The real power of the process maps is going to be keeping at a high level and having that simple visual aid to walk your group through. Key items from today's sessions are Process maps are an illustration of what apps look like to help you communicate and collaborate with multiple stakeholders. There are 3 levels of process maps, and the details at each one of those levels is different. And when producing your process maps, always try to map out the current state. And we're done. That concludes the session. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to leave them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much.